She had 72 hours before they came for her. She knew this because Lord Aldrich had told her so himself, standing in the marble hallway of her father's estate, his smile pleasant, his eyes absolutely cold. 72 hours, Lady Seraphine, then you belong to the Alpha King. Belong, like a horse, like a parcel of land, like a thing with no voice of its own. She had smiled back at him. Oh, she had smiled beautifully, the way her mother taught her, and she had said, "Of course, my lord." And then she had waited until midnight, and then she had run. My name is Seraphine Voss, and this is the story of everything I thought I was escaping, and everything I ran straight toward instead. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you about the cold. Dio, Chapter 1, The Cabin. The Ashvale Forest in late autumn is not a place that welcomes human women carrying nothing but a stolen saddlebag and a kitchen knife. The trees close in behind you like doors slamming shut. The ground is uneven, treacherous, roots hidden under a carpet of frozen leaves that crunch too loudly when you're trying to be quiet. The wind doesn't blow so much as it pries, finding every gap in your clothing, every inch of exposed skin, and reminding you with real persistence that it would like very much for you to stop moving and simply lie down. I did not lie down. I walked for 3 days. I walked until my boots had rubbed through to blisters, until my fingers had gone from painful to numb, to something past numb that worried me deeply. And I walked until I had eaten the last of the bread I'd taken from the kitchen. Coarse bread, servant's bread, the most delicious bread I had ever tasted. And the water in my canteen had frozen solid, and I was drinking snowmelt from the cup of a fallen bark. I walked until I found the cabin. It sat in a small clearing half swallowed by the forest. The roof had buckled on one side, and the door hung at an angle that suggested it had lost an argument with the wind some years ago. One window was missing its shutter entirely. Moss had colonized the northern wall with cheerful, absolute thoroughness. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I shoved the door open with my shoulder. It complained loudly, as old doors do, and stepped inside. The smell hit me first: old wood, cold ash, pine resin, and something faintly animal. I old and wild like a den long vacated. The floor was rough-hewn planking, solid beneath my feet. A stone hearth dominated one wall. A crude shelf held rusted cooking tools. In the corner, someone had left a pile of wool blankets, moth-eaten but thick. I stood in the center of that ruined little room and burst into tears. Not from grief, or not only from grief, but because I had made it. 3 days through a wilderness that had done its level best to kill me, and I had made it to something that had 4 walls and a roof and a door that could be wedged shut. I was alive. I was hidden. And for the first time in 22 years of being Lord Evander Voss's obedient, decorative, perfectly marriageable daughter, I was utterly, entirely, ferociously free. I cried for perhaps 2 minutes, then I stopped, wiped my face, and started figuring out how to build a fire. There was no time for extended grief when there was survival to attend to. I was there 6 weeks before he found me. 6 weeks of learning, mostly by failure. How to keep a fire without burning the cabin down. How to set a snare. I failed 11 times before catching my first rabbit, and I won't pretend I didn't shout in triumph at that small, cold clearing. How to read the weather and the color of the sky, the behavior of birds, the way the wind shifted direction before a storm. How to sleep alone without being afraid of it. That last one took the longest. I had grown up surrounded. Servants, chaperones, the endless social architecture of noble life. Even at the estate, there was always someone close by, always voices somewhere in the house, always the sense of human proximity. Silence, Real silence had terrified me as a child. In the Asheville, I learned to love it. The forest had its own language, a constant layered murmur of wind and water and small creatures going about their lives with uncomplicated urgency. After the first week, I began to hear it instead of fearing it. After the second, I began to find it beautiful. By the 6th week, the silence of the forest was the most comforting sound I knew. Which is exactly why I heard the wolves the first time. Not howling, not the dramatic, distant sound I associated with wolves in stories. This was quieter than that. A low, collective sound somewhere between communication and song, threading through the trees at dusk like smoke. I stood at my window, the one with the intact shutter, and listened, my breath fogging the cold glass. Something about that sound reached into my chest and pressed against something I didn't have a name for. I told myself it was fear. I was wrong about that. Chapter 2. The First Sighting. It was a Tuesday, I think, when I saw him for the first time. I had been chopping firewood at the back of the clearing. It was hard, monotonous work, and I had developed a grim satisfaction in it. Lord Aldrich's people had never thought to teach me something so useful. All those years of music lessons and embroidery and the precise art of entering a room at the correct angle, and not one person had ever thought to show me how to split kindling. Their loss. I was mid-swing when the feeling hit me. Not a sound, not a movement I could identify. Just a sudden, absolute certainty that I was being watched. I lowered the axe slowly and turned. At the edge of the clearing, where the tree line began, stood a wolf. I had seen wolves before, hunting trophies at my father's estate, illustrations in the natural history books I'd read in secret. I was not supposed to have opinions about natural history, but I had them anyway. I knew what wolves looked like. This was not what wolves were supposed to look like. He was enormous. His shoulder came up to my waist, which I know because I estimated it carefully in those first frozen seconds, because my mind needed something specific to do while the rest of me tried to process what I was seeing. His coat was the darkest black, the kind of black that has depth to it, the black of deep water, of sky between stars, and his eyes were amber, not brown amber, not the muddy gold of autumn leaves, amber like firelight, amber like a living flame held still behind glass, and they were focused on me with an intelligence that had nothing to do with predator and prey. He was studying me. I was also studying him. We stood like that for what might have been 30 seconds and felt like 300 years. Then he turned, unhurried, almost casual, and disappeared into the trees. I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, or not from fear alone. I went inside and made tea and told myself very firmly that a large wolf was simply a large wolf and I had other things to think about. Short pause. This was the second time I was wrong. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Never during the night. Always at the edge of daylight, either dawn or dusk. And when the light was that particular gray gold that makes everything look like the opening page of a story. Sometimes he was at the tree line, sometimes closer. Once I looked up from gathering snow to melt for water, and he was standing 10 feet away, watching me with those impossible amber eyes, so still he might have been carved from the shadows themselves. I dropped my bucket. He watched me pick it up. There was something in his expression. If wolves could be said to have expressions, and I was increasingly certain that this one could, that I can only describe as patient amusement. Very helpful, I told him, brushing snow off my knees, his ears tilted forward, listening. I straightened up and looked at him properly. You keep coming back. I don't have food to spare, if that's what you're after. I barely have enough for myself. I paused. Though I suppose you're not interested in dried berries and rabbit stew anyway." He sat down. Not the tentative, uncertain lowering of an animal unsure of the ground. A deliberate, composed settlement, the way a person sits when they intend to stay a while. "Right," I said. And then, because there was clearly no point in being normal about this, "My name is Seraphine, in case you were wondering." His head tilted slightly to one side. I went back to collecting snow. He stayed until dark. Chapter 3. The Storm and the Gift. 3 weeks into what I had privately begun calling the watch, because that was what it was, he came and he watched, and I went about my life and pretended this was an entirely normal arrangement. The blizzard arrived. I had seen it coming, and 2 days of warning in the sky, the particular flat light that precedes serious snow, the way the birds had gone quiet and the wind had shifted north. I had spent those 2 days cutting and stacking wood with a kind of desperate thoroughness, reinforcing the gaps in the cabin walls with moss and packed mud, taking inventory of my food stores with grim attention to mathematics. I was not afraid of the storm. I was afraid of what came after. If I lost a week to being snowed in, if I couldn't move, couldn't gather, couldn't maintain my routine, I would fall behind in ways that mattered. Winter had no interest in excuses. The storm hit at midnight on the second day. I lay in my blankets and listened to it rage, and I found, to my surprise, that I was not entirely miserable. And there was something about being inside while the world outside went to war with itself that felt almost peaceful. The fire was bright. The walls held. I was warm. I fell asleep to the sound of wind and woke to silence. And to something outside my door. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence. The same instinct that had alerted me to him at the woodpile, but stronger now, and accompanied by something else. Something being dragged. I wrapped my blanket around my shoulders and went to the door. I opened it. The world was white and brilliant, blinding after the dark interior of the cabin. And there, at the top of the 2 steps that led to my door, was a deer. A young buck, recently killed, the wound clean and precise, still warm, already partly cleaned, as if someone had made a start on the butchering before delivering it. When I stared at the deer, then I looked up. He stood at the tree line, black against the white of the new snow, watching me with those amber eyes. I opened my mouth to say something, I'm not sure what. Thank you seemed inadequate. What do you seem too large? Instead, I stood there in my blanket in the snow with my mouth slightly open, and he held my gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. I looked at the deer again. Then I did what any sensible woman running for her life does when presented with an unexpected gift that will get her through winter. I got my knife. Pause. Warmth. Almost humor. I also said thank you to the empty tree line. The wind carried it away into the forest. Somewhere in those dark trees, I thought I heard something that might have been, just barely, an exhale. Chapter 4. The Transformation. I want to tell you the exact moment I understood what he was, not the first moment I suspected. That had been early, within the first week of the watch, when I noticed that his eyes held more deliberate intelligence than any animal I had ever encountered, when I noticed that he chose when to appear and when to withdraw, that his presence felt less like an animal's proximity and more like a decision, a choice. Not the first moment I found the legends. I had 2 books with me. I had grabbed them almost as an afterthought when I fled, a medical text and a collection of old forest lore I had borrowed from my father's library and never returned. The second book was, in the context of my current situation, considerably more useful than I had expected, and it had a chapter on the ash veil, on its age, its reputation, the old stories attached to it, stories about the ash veil's wolves, about how the old bloodlines ran through these forests, bloodlines that predated the human kingdoms, bloodlines that carried something in them older than law or language, the people who walked between shapes, the ones the old texts called the kin of the moon, shifters. I had read that chapter 3 times. I had put the book down and looked out the window at the tree line for a long time. Then I had gone back to my inventory of firewood, because what else do you do? But the moment I understood, truly understood, not just suspected or theorized, but knew, was the 4th week of the watch. A morning that had started like any other, gray and cold, that the forest wearing its winter coat of bare branches and iron sky. I had been cutting pine boughs to reinforce the roof when the sound came, a sound I recognized from my flight through the forest, the particular cadence of horses, and with it, men's voices. My blood went cold. I dropped the boughs and ran for the cabin. I heard them before I could get inside. 3 voices moving through the trees to my east, following what must have been my own trail through the snow. I had been less careful than I thought. I had been comfortable. I had stopped being afraid. I pressed myself against the back wall of the cabin, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I still had the kitchen knife. I was also acutely aware of how little a kitchen knife would do against the king's soldiers. The voices grew closer. You and then? They stopped. Not faded away. Stopped. Abruptly, mid-sentence, like a record cut off, followed by a sound that was not a voice and not wind and not anything else I had words for. A growl, low and vast and absolutely certain of itself. The kind of sound that reaches directly into the animal part of a human brain and switches off every rational thought. Then chaos. Shouting. The crash of a horse spooked sideways, boots on snow moving very quickly in the opposite direction and diminishing. Silence. I waited 30 seconds. Then I went to the door and opened it a crack. He was in the clearing. The black wolf. My wolf, I had started thinking of him that way without noticing, standing between my door and the tree line, facing the direction the men had gone. His hackles were still raised. There was a tension in his stillness that was different from his usual composed watchfulness. He was angry. And then he turned, and his amber eyes found mine through the crack in the door, and I felt the moment his whole focus shifted. I opened the door all the way. He looked at me. I looked at him. In the space between us, something passed that I still don't entirely have words for. Some recognition, some specific communication that required neither speech nor shared language. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. He held my gaze a moment longer. Then he did something that I will never forget for as long as I live. He bowed his head. Not the way a dog ducks its head. Not deferentially, deliberately. A formal inclination, the gesture of one equal acknowledging another. And then the air around him changed. That's the only way I know to describe it. The air changed. A shimmer like heat over summer stone, except it was the middle of winter and there was no heat source. His form seemed to blur at its edges. And then, with a series of sounds I will not try to describe in polite language because they were deeply unsettling, the wolf was gone. And a man stood in the snow where the wolf had been. He was tall, very tall, broader across the shoulders than anyone I had encountered in my father's drawing rooms, which hosted plenty of men who thought of themselves as large. Dark hair, thick and somewhat wild, past his jaw. His skin was bronzed in the way of someone who spends serious time outdoors in every season, marked with old scars on his forearms and the line of his collarbone. And he was wearing nothing, in the middle of a blizzard's aftermath, and appeared to find this entirely unremarkable. His eyes were amber, of course they were. He looked at me across the clearing. I looked at him. "Oh," I said. It was not my finest moment of eloquence. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the idea of one, considering an application. He took one step toward me, then stopped, watching my face with that absolute, unhurried attention I had come to recognize as specific to him. The way he watched everything, taking full inventory before he spoke or moved. "You are safe," he said. His voice was low and slightly rough at the edges, as though he used it less than he might. The accent was not from any region I could immediately identify. Something older in the vowels, was something that felt like it belonged to a different time. I stood in my doorway staring at a large, naked man who had been a wolf 20 seconds ago and said, "I know." Because I did. I had known it since the first morning I woke up and went to the window and saw him at the tree line. I had simply been refusing to examine the reason. He tilted his head slightly. That gesture, I would come to know it very well. It meant he was processing something unexpected. "You are not afraid," he observed. I didn't say that. I considered him. But fear and safety aren't the same thing. One can be afraid and also know that one is safe. They coexist. It's very inconvenient. The not-quite smile became something marginally more definite. "I am Kale," he said. Kale. I turned the name over in my mind, something ancient in it. Something that matched the cadence of his voice, the particular quality of his presence. "Seraphine," I said, "you've been watching me for 4 weeks." "Yes." I nodded. "Come inside then," I said, "before you freeze, though I suspect you won't." He didn't freeze. I was right about that. Chapter 5. The Beginning of Language. He came inside and immediately made the cabin feel different. Not smaller. He was very large and the cabin was very small, but that wasn't quite it. He made the space feel alive in a way it hadn't before. Like warmth moving into a cold room, a quality of presence that changed the air without effort. I found him a shirt. It didn't fit him properly. He wore it with absolute indifference to this fact, or pulling at the fabric with curious fingers the way a person examines something they find mildly interesting but functionally unnecessary. "You don't need clothing," I said, more observation than question. "No." He looked at me. "You do?" "Yes." I was very carefully not meeting his eyes. "Different customs." "I know customs," he said. His voice was careful, choosing words with precision. "My people have them also, different from yours." I looked up then. "Your people, the kin of the moon." His attention sharpened immediately. "You know this name." "I have a book." I crossed to the shelf and retrieved it, turning to the chapter. He came to stand beside me, too close for drawing room propriety, or exactly the right distance for someone who had spent his life learning to read the world through proximity and presence, and looked at the page. He couldn't read it. I realized this a moment later when I saw his eyes moving across the text without fixing on any word. "The letters mean nothing to you," I said carefully. "The letters are the same," he said, which was not the same as no. "The words—" He stopped. "I know words, not reading words. Spoken language, but not written." He nodded, seeming neither ashamed nor defensive about this. It was a fact, like the color of the sky. Interesting to note, irrelevant to dwell on. "I could read it to you," I offered. He looked at me. Those amber eyes in the indoor light were something extraordinary. Warm gold threaded with darker amber. Yes, the kind of eyes you could spend considerable time studying if you weren't being very strict with yourself. I was being very strict with myself. "Yes," he said, "read." So I read. I read the whole chapter. Sitting at the hearth, him cross-legged on the floor across from me, utterly still and utterly focused, like a wolf at a rabbit hole. The legends were fragmentary as old lore tends to be. Pieces of story without clear seams, accounts that had been retold enough times that fact and embellishment had become indistinguishable. But the shape of it emerged, an old bloodline predating the human kingdoms that had eventually claimed this land. A people who had lived in and with the forest for generations, who carried the shift in their blood as naturally as humans carried the color of their eyes. Who had, over the centuries, had been hunted. I paused at that word, looked up. Cale was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Hunted, I said quietly. It is in the past. His voice was careful. Is it? A long pause. The fire crackled between us. No, he said finally. I closed the book and held it in my lap. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. I was running from a man who wanted to own me, I said. I didn't know I would find people who were running from the same. He was quiet for a moment. Then, not running, never again running. There was something in those 4 words that redrew the shape of everything. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most alive of my life. He came every day, sometimes in wolf form, sometimes when emerging from the trees at dawn and sitting at the edge of the clearing while I did my morning work, his amber eyes following my movements with that particular quality of attention, as though I were the most interesting thing in the forest. And the forest had a very great deal to offer. Sometimes in human form, ducking through my low doorway and settling himself wherever seemed natural, which was usually the floor, usually close to me, in a proximity I had long since stopped feeling the need to address. I taught him to read. This was not something I had planned. It emerged naturally from our conversations, from the increasing fluency of his spoken language, from his evident curiosity about the books. He learned with a speed that startled me. Within 3 weeks, he could sound out words. When within 5, he was reading the natural history passages slowly but correctly, his finger tracing the line. Here, he said one afternoon, pointing. This is wrong. Which part? He turned the book toward me. A passage about wolf behavior, territory, hierarchy, pack dynamics. The author thinks the alpha leads by force, he said. Dominance through fighting. This is not how it works. He paused, finding words. An alpha leads by carrying, by taking weight from the pack. A pack does not follow fear. A pack follows someone who holds them. I looked at him. You speak from experience. I am an alpha. He said it without pride, without performance. A fact like his name. Of the pack in this forest, I said. The wolves I sometimes hear. Yes. He was quiet a moment. Then, and others, beyond this forest. I set the book down. How far beyond? 3 days in wolf form. He watched my face with that careful attention. Many packs, different clans. In the old times, there was a king over all of them, a single alpha to whom all others answered. I kept my voice very steady. Is there still? His amber eyes held mine. Yes, he said. There it was. I had suspected. I should have suspected sooner if I were being honest with myself. The quality of his bearing, the particular way other animals gave him space without being chased, the way even the wind seemed to move around him with a kind of deference. I had simply been choosing not to assemble the pieces. You're the Alpha King, I said. He nodded. Simple. No ceremony about it. I absorbed this for a moment. I fled, I said carefully, from a man who wanted to force me into a marriage to consolidate his political power. And I ran into the forest, and I made my life here. And the Alpha King of an ancient bloodline has been bringing me firewood and sitting on my floor for 5 weeks. His mouth curved. The firewood was one time. The symbolism holds. A long pause. He was watching me with an expression I had come to recognize, but still didn't entirely know how to respond to. Something open in it, something patient and absolute, the way a deep river is patient, not because it isn't powerful, but because it knows exactly where it's going. Seraphine. My name in his mouth had a weight to it, like something being claimed. I did not come here to take anything from you. Then why? Because you were here. He said it simply. When? Because the forest told me something had changed. Because I saw you, the first day before you saw me. You were building a fire. A pause. You were talking to it, telling it what it needed to do. I felt heat rise in my face. It was taking too long. I know. Something in his voice. I watched for a long time before you saw me. I could not. He stopped, finding the word. I could not look away. There is a specific kind of silence that falls between two people when something true has been said and both of them know it, and neither of them is quite ready to touch it yet. We sat in that silence for a long time. The fire crackled between us, and outside the forest went about its ancient business, and I sat across from the alpha king of a people I had read about in a borrowed book, and I thought about the word inevitable. Oint chapter 6. They come again. They came on a Wednesday. I know this one with certainty, because I had been marking the days by notching a post by the door, and the 7th notch in the 3rd row was fresh. Wednesday. 43 days in the ash veil. I was checking my snares when I heard the dogs. Not wolves, dogs. Hunting dogs, trained and purposeful, the kind Lord Aldrich used when he wanted something found in deep cover. I knew the sound well from childhood hunts I had observed from horseback, decorative and silent as expected. I dropped the snare and ran. I didn't go toward the cabin. That was the one unbreakable rule I had set myself, that I must never lead a direct line from any point of contact back to my shelter. I ran east, into denser trees, moving as quietly as I could manage while moving quickly, which is a difficult combination that I had practiced exactly for this scenario. The dogs were fast. I climbed. It was not dignified. It was not graceful. It was pure survival. Hands finding bark, feet finding branch, hauling myself up into the canopy of a massive elm while the dogs circled below, and the sound of horses grew louder in the trees behind them. There were 4 of them. The king's riders, in the dark blue and silver that I had grown up associating with order and safety, and had learned in the past 2 months to associate with threat. One of them, an older man with gray threading his beard, a face like weather-worn stone, was reading the ground with a tracker's eye. My ground, my trail. She was here recently, he said, calm, professional, the tone of a man who has found many things that didn't want to be found. Within the hour, the snow's disturbed. One of the younger riders looked up, straight at the tree I was in, for one terrible moment. I pressed myself against the trunk and stopped breathing. He looked away. Check that line east, the tracker said. She may have doubled back. They moved east, away from me for now. But the dogs were still circling, still interested, and the tracker had not moved from his spot below my tree. He looked up, directly at me. Our eyes met. I felt the world tilt. And then he did something I had not expected. He looked back down slowly and called to the others. Nothing this way, let's try the river. I stayed in that tree for 20 minutes, long after the sound of the horses faded, long after the dogs' voices grew distant and then disappeared entirely. Then I climbed down carefully. When turned around, Kale was standing 6 feet behind me in wolf form, absolutely still. He had been there the entire time. I could tell from the focused quality of his stillness, not a wolf who had just arrived, but a wolf who had been present and decided deliberately not to intervene. Watching the tracker, watching me. I stared at him. He held my gaze. "The older man," I said. He saw me. The wolf's ears tilted forward. He let me go. A pause. Then Cale shifted, that shimmer, that wrongness, then rightness, and stood before me in human form, wearing the heavy wool shirt I had sewn for him, his dark hair loose around his face. "He has been in these woods before," Cale said. His voice was very quiet. "Many years ago." "He knows what you are," I realized. "He knows what I am." A pause. "He made a different choice then. He is making another one now." I absorbed this. "How much time do we have?" Cale looked toward the direction the riders had gone. His amber eyes in the fading afternoon light were very still. "Not much," he said. Chapter 7. What he told me. That night, he stayed. He had never stayed through the night before. It had been an unspoken boundary. His presence was abundant during the daylight hours and the early evening, and then he would go, back into the forest, back to whatever the Alpha King's life looked like in his own territory. I had not asked. He had not offered. Some things are established through the absence of conversation as much as through its presence. But that night, after the riders, he sat by my fire and didn't move to leave when the darkness deepened around the cabin. I sat across from him and didn't ask him to. We both understood something had changed. After a long time, he spoke. "The king who wants you," he said. "His name is Aldrich Vance." "Lord Aldrich, yes." I looked up from the fire. "You know him?" "I know of him." Cale turned the ring I had noticed on his finger, a dark metal band worn smooth, the only ornamentation he consistently wore. He has been reaching into the ash veil for 3 years, slowly, quietly, claiming territory that is not his to claim. A pause. "Your land laws consider the forest unowned." "Unowned," I repeated. "But it isn't." "No." His voice was very flat. "It is not. He wants the forest," I said slowly. "Not just me. He wants what the forest contains." Cale's eyes met mine. "Yes." Something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. He told my father the marriage was a social alliance, a political connection. He is one of the most powerful lords in the eastern reaches, and my father has debts. I was the currency. I paused. But there was more to it. "There is always more," Cale said, "when men like that want something. What does the ash veil have that he wants badly enough to cross 3 kingdoms for it?" Cale was quiet for a long moment. The fire between us was lower now, burning down to deep coals, and the light it cast made everything look like the inside of a dream. "The ash veil is old," he said finally. "Older than the kingdoms. Older than the names humans have given to the land. The trees here have roots that go down to something. To a layer of the world that is neither ordinary earth nor anything you have a word for in your books." He paused. "My people have protected it for generations. The kin of the moon were here before the first human lord drew his first border, and we will be here after the last one crumbles." "But he wants it," I said. "He knows what he wants." A pause. "He does not know what he's asking for." I sat with this for a moment. "And I was supposed to be, what, a way in?" "Yes." The word landed carefully, like something being set down gently on a surface that might not hold. "There are old rights of the land. If a lord's heir marries into the border territories, if there is a legal bond between a human house and the Ashvale's edge, it changes what claims can be made." He looked at me. "He chose you specifically. Lady Seraphine Voss, whose family holds the eastern boundary estate, whose land touches the first trees." I thought about my father's debts. Did about Lord Aldrich's pleasant smile in the marble hallway. "He's been planning this for years," I said. "Yes, and my father knew." Long pause. "Your father?" Cale said carefully, knew that Lord Aldrich wanted the marriage. I believe he did not know why. I thought of my father, his distracted love, his genuine if impractical fondness for me, the debts that had grown over the years of my mother's illness and death, quietly and without resolution, his relief, and I had seen it as relief at the time, that particular set of his shoulders. When Lord Aldrich had made the offer, he had thought he was giving me security. Pause. She's processing. He didn't know, I said slowly. I don't believe so. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was clenched. It didn't fix anything. It didn't change the fact that I was sitting in an abandoned cabin in the middle of winter because the alternative was a marriage designed to strip an ancient people of their land and sovereignty, but it was something. I have to warn them, I said. Your people. Cale looked at me, that absolute attention. My people, he said, are already aware. Then what happens? The fire settled, dropping lower. In the near dark, his amber eyes were the brightest things in the room. That depends, he said, on what you choose. What I choose, I repeated. You are free in this forest, he said. You came here to be free. I will not make another claim on you. You have had enough of that. I looked at him across the dying fire. 22 years of other people's choices. My father's choices, Lord Aldrich's choices, the king's choices, the slow accumulation of decisions made about me and around me, and for me, each one a polite cage. I had broken out of the last one and come here, and here, in the cold and the silence and the hard work of actual survival. I had found out what I actually was when nobody was arranging me, stubborn, resourceful, considerably more interested in the forest than in drawing rooms, entirely unprepared to meet an alpha king who read aloud haltingly from a natural history text and sat on my floor and brought me deer carcasses and looked at me like I was the most interesting thing in the world. You said that depends on what I choose, I said. What are the choices? You could leave the forest. He said it without inflection, presenting it as a real option rather than a threat or a dismissal. Sure, there are ways out that Lord Aldrich's men don't know. West through the high passes, before the deep snow closes them. Other kingdoms, other places. And the second option? Stay, he said, simple as gravity. With your people. With me. Pause longer. The fire crackled. Outside, very far away, a wolf lifted its voice to the sky. Not threatening, not mournful. Something else. Something that sounded in the quiet cabin remarkably like a question. That is not a small thing, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. What it would mean for you, for your position, bringing a human woman into whatever this is. No, he agreed. It is not small. Your people would accept it? He was quiet for a moment. My people will accept what their Alpha King chooses. But... And here something entered his voice that I hadn't heard before, something careful, something almost uncertain. That is not why I ask. I waited. I ask, he said, because when I watched you build that first fire and speak to it like it was a person who needed instructions, something happened that I do not have a word for. A pause. In my language, there is a word for the thing that happens when you find the person your instincts recognize as yours. It does not translate well. What does it translate to? His amber eyes held mine. Fated, he said. It translates badly to fated. Pause, the longest yet. 22 years of being arranged. 22 years of other people's certainties applied to my life without my consent. And here, in a broken-down cabin in the middle of an ancient forest, the Alpha King of an old bloodline was telling me he had found something he could not explain, and asking me what I wanted. Asking me. Not telling. Not claiming, not arranging. asking. "I want to understand what I'm agreeing to," I said finally. "Before I agree to anything, I want to know your people. I want to know this forest. Properly, not as a refuge, but as a place I actually live. I want to—" I stopped, finding the words. I have spent my entire life becoming what other people needed me to be. I don't actually know yet what I am when I choose for myself. I need time to find out. He nodded. No hurt in it, no impatience. A deep, steady acceptance, like the forest itself absorbing weather. "Then we will take time," he said. "That's it?" "That is enough." A pause. "I am not Aldrich Vance, Seraphine. I am not your father. I am not a lord with debts and ambitions. I am—" Something shifted across his face. A rare, unguarded moment. "I am a man who found someone unexpected in his forest and would very much like to keep finding her." I looked at the fire for a long time. Then I said, "Tell me about your people." And he did. Chapter 8. The long winter deepened. The world outside the cabin reduced itself to essentials: snow, cold, wood, water, food, fire. Everything stripped away until only what mattered remained. Cale came every day. Sometimes he was Wolf. Those mornings, I would find him already in the clearing when I woke, sitting patient as carved stone, his dark coat a single piece of shadow against the white landscape. We would go about the morning's work side by side, and I found I had stopped narrating my tasks aloud and simply did them, with the comfortable awareness of a second presence that required nothing from me but was simply there. Sometimes he was human. Those days were different. Fuller, somehow, charged with the accumulation of things being said and things not yet said. He was learning to read with real competency now. I would come home from the afternoon snare check to find him sitting by the window with the natural history book open on his knees, his lips moving slightly as he worked through a passage. "It is still wrong about wolves," he told me one evening, pointing to the chapter. "You should write a correction." He looked at me, then at the quill I kept for marking my journal with an expression of deep dubiety. "I will help," I said. And we spent an entire evening on it. Him dictating in the careful, measured way. He chose words when he was being precise, me writing it down in my smallest hand in the margins of the book. The territorial behaviors, the actual hierarchy of a pack, which was nothing like the violence and dominance model the author assumed, the way packs communicated, the layered system of sound and scent and body language that constituted a complete and sophisticated language he had grown up speaking before he'd learned words. "Your written language," he said at one point, watching my hand move across the page. "It is only one thing at once, one word after another." Yes. Pack language is many things at once. Scent and sound and movement together. The same moment contains many layers. He paused. Your way must feel very slow." "It feels very normal," I said. Then, "What am I in your language? Right now, what does this moment say?" He was quiet for a moment, in a way that told me he was actually translating rather than deflecting. "Warmth," he said finally. "Safety. Home." A pause. "Also." He hesitated. "Also?" I looked up. Those amber eyes on mine, something unshielded in them. "Also wanting," he said, simple and honest as gravity. "That also." I looked back at the page. My handwriting had become slightly less even in the last few lines. The tracker came back, alone. I was at the river, breaking ice for water, when I heard him behind me. Careful footsteps, deliberate enough that I was meant to hear them, not trying to surprise. I straightened and turned. He stood 10 feet back. The weathered face, on the gray beard, the eyes that had found me in a tree and decided not to say so. "Lady Seraphine," he said, not unfriendly. "Careful." "You let me go," I said. "Before." "Yes." He did not explain it. "My name is Harwick. I have worked for Lord Aldrich for 8 years. A pause. I did not know, for most of them, what I was actually doing. And now, he reached into his coat and produced a folded document. His plans for the Ashvale, he said. A survey his people have been conducting quietly. The kin of the moon are mapped here, their territories, their denning grounds. He held it out. Their numbers. I stared at him. Why are you giving this to me? Because I tracked the young queen of Lord Aldrich's ambitions into a forest, he said, and found she'd made it her home. And because the last time I tracked something into these trees and chose the wrong side of that choice, I have not slept entirely well since. He pressed the document into my hands. Give it to the wolf. He turned to leave. Harwick? He stopped. What did you track into these trees before? A long pause. A woman, he said, and her child, 20 years ago. He didn't turn around. I still hear the child sometimes, in quiet places. He walked away into the trees. I stood with the document in my hands and the sound of the river running cold beneath its ice. That evening, I gave it to Cale. He read it slowly, with the competency he'd built over weeks. His face was very still as he read, and very controlled, which told me more than if he'd shown something. When he finished, he looked up. He has been planning this longer than we knew, he said. What does he know about you specifically? A pause. Enough. He folded the document. He knows there is an Alpha King. He does not know who. Is that? Does that protect you? It complicates his plan. He was quiet. It does not stop it. I sat across from him, the fire between us, the cabin walls doing their best against the winter outside. Then we need a plan of our own, I said. He looked at me. Something moved across his face. Something careful and wondering. We, he repeated. Yes. I met his eyes. We. Chapter 9. The Gathering. 3 days later they came. Not Lord Aldrich's men. The opposite. I woke before dawn to the sound of wolves. Not one voice but many, layered and complex, approaching from every direction at once. I wrapped myself in my cloak and opened the door to find the clearing transformed. They came from the trees in their dozens, some in wolf form, every size and color, silver and tawny and deep gray, and one old female who was almost entirely white, and some in human form, tall figures wrapped in furs and moving with that particular fluid quality that I now associated entirely with Cale, and understood, seeing it in all of them, as something in the blood. Cale stood in the center of the clearing, in human form, still and composed, watching them arrive. When the last of them had settled, the clearing full now, wolves and people mixed in a pattern that made no distinction between the two forms, because there was no distinction. He turned to look at me. Come, he said. I stepped off my porch into the snow. They watched me. Dozens of amber eyes, in wolf faces and human ones, all with that same quality of deep attention. I held very still and did not, through considerable effort of will, make any expression that suggested I was frightened. I was not entirely not frightened, but I held very still. A woman stepped forward, older than Cale, not elderly, but with that quality of age that is about depth rather than years, a weathered authority in her face, and a quality of patience in her amber eyes that suggested she had waded through many things and would wade through many more. Seraphine Voss, she said. Her voice was exactly what I'd have expected, deep and clear and utterly certain of itself. Yes, I said. I am Mira, elder of the mountain clan. She looked at me with an openness that was not unfriendly but was absolutely measuring. Cale has told us of you. Has he? He said you speak to fires. A pause. He said you ran from a man who would own you into a forest that would not. He said you found him before he found you, though he reached you first. She tilted her head. He said you were stubborn. I glanced at Cale. He was watching me with an expression of composed innocence. "He is not wrong," I said. Something shifted in Mira's face. Not quite a smile. More like the decision to allow one, held in reserve for now. "Lord Aldrich moves," she said. "He has run out of patience with his lost bride. He will come for the forest next, and for you and for Cale. We must move faster." "What do you need from me?" She held my gaze. "You hold something we do not, the legal right of the borderland. And your family's estate touches the first trees. The boundary line of the Ashvale runs through your father's eastern field. That can't be changed. No. But it can be used." She looked at me steadily. "If the lady of the eastern estate were to formally deed that boundary land to the Ashvale's protection, to record it before a witness as preserved territory under the old forest rights, it breaks the legal approach Aldrich is using. He cannot claim forest sovereignty through a marriage if there is no human-side land to anchor the claim." I understood. My father would have to agree. "Yes." "My father," I said carefully, "is not a bad man. He is a man who has made some poor decisions from limited information and considerable financial pressure." I looked at Mira. "If someone were to give him the full information—" "We would need a letter," she said, "in your hand, explaining what Aldrich actually intends, what the land would mean in his control." A pause, and then an escort willing to bring it. I looked at Harwick's document, folded in Cale's hands. I thought about my father reading Lord Aldrich's survey notes, the cold, systematic inventory of an ancient people's lives and territories, the language of extraction. "I'll write it tonight," I said. I wrote it by firelight, Cale sitting across from me, reading Harwick's document again with the slow thoroughness of someone building a complete understanding. It was the longest thing I had ever written, not in length, though it ran to many pages, but in weight. Every word chosen with the knowledge that my father would read it, as that my father's decision might turn on the way I explain things, that the clarity or failure of my prose could matter to the safety of people who had not asked for it but needed it. I wrote about Lord Aldrich's plan, about the survey, about the kin of the moon. Not as legend, not as the fairy tale version, but as what they were, a people, with history and culture and territory and the same fundamental right to continue existing as anyone else. I wrote about the Ashvale, what it was, why it mattered, what would happen to it and to them under the control of someone who saw it only as a resource. And I wrote about myself, about running, about the cabin, about 6 weeks of learning what I was when nobody was arranging me. I did not write about Cale. Some things are not for letters. When I finished, I sat back and looked at what I had written for a long time. "It's good?" Cale asked. "I don't know." I looked at him. "Will you read it?" He came to sit beside me, close enough that his shoulder pressed against mine, and read the letter with the careful attention he gave everything. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it is good." "How can you tell?" He looked at me. "Because it sounds like you." I folded the letter and sealed it with a drop of pine resin. I had no wax, and wrote my father's name on the front in my clearest hand. Then I sat back, and I looked at Cale, and I let myself, for the first time without qualification or qualification of the qualification, simply look at him. He looked back. "Whatever happens with the letter," I said, whatever my father decides, I want you to know that I am not leaving. This is not conditional on whether it works." His amber eyes held mine. "Seraphine," he said, my name in his voice. "I know what I want," I said. "I've been finding out all winter, and I know now. I want the forest. I want the work of it, the difficulty of it, I want the silence and the wolves, and the way the light comes through the trees in the morning." A pause. "I want you." Specifically, deliberately, with full awareness of how complicated that is. He was very still. "I am not Lord Aldrich," he said very quietly. "I am not interested in a claim." "I know." I held his gaze. "I'm making the claim. From my side. Willingly." Pause. Full beat. He reached out and took my hand. Not grasping, not claiming. Just his hand around mine, warm and solid. The way something becomes real when it's held. "Then it is mutual," he said. "Yes," I said, "it is." Outside, very quietly, one of the wolves at the tree line lifted its voice, and then another, and another. A sound that grew slowly from one voice to many, filling the winter air around the small cabin, surrounding it, not threatening, but surrounding it the way a family surrounds something they are choosing to protect. Chapter 10. The Resolution. My father came, not in response to the letter. He hadn't received it yet. Couldn't have. It had only been 4 days. He came, I realized later, because Harwick had sent him something first. A rider had reached the Voss estate 3 days before my letter arrived. She'd carrying a single sheet with the tracker's weathered signature and the words, "Your daughter is alive and in danger of a different kind than you think. Come to the Ashvale's edge, alone." Harwick, it turned out, had many feelings about the choices he had made 20 years ago in these trees, and was taking the opportunity to address them with some thoroughness. My father came to the forest's edge on a gray morning, alone as instructed, his horse unhappy about the proximity to the trees, and stood waiting. Mira met him. In human form, impeccably composed, with 2 of the mountain clan's elders behind her. She handed him my letter. He read it 3 times. I know this because Cale told me afterward, having observed from the trees in wolf form, which he was willing to admit was a habit he was working on disclosing. When my father finished reading, he was quiet for a long time. "She is safe?" he asked. "She is," Mira said. "She is more than safe. She has made a home." My father looked at the trees, at the dark old depth of them. "Lord Aldrich misled me," he said. "Yes." Mira let the word stand alone. "I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I was securing her future. He had resources, stability. She would have been protected." "You were deceived about the nature of the protection being offered," Mira said, not unkindly. "The question now is not what you believed then. It is what you choose to do with what you know." My father looked at the survey notes, which Harwick had apparently also sent along, with the systematic inventory of the kin of the moon's territories laid out in the precise, acquisitive handwriting of Lord Aldrich's surveyors. And he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Where do I sign?" The land document was drawn up within the week, a formal deed of preservation for the eastern boundary land, not a gift to the kin of the moon, because the land was not my father's to give what had never been his to take, but a legal recognition of the pre-existing rights of the Ashvale, which complicated Lord Aldrich's claim in the precise, irrevocable way that Mira had described. It did not solve everything. Lord Aldrich was powerful and his patience was not unlimited, but it closed the legal door he had spent years quietly opening, and it closed it in a way that drew attention. Other lords, legal scholars, a council representative who happened to be in the Eastern Territories, to what he had been attempting, attention that Aldrich, that who had depended entirely on the quiet of his approach, found deeply uncongenial. He withdrew. Not forever, perhaps not permanently. Men like that rarely give up permanently on things they want. But he withdrew, and the Ashvale remained itself, and the kin of the moon continued, as they had continued for centuries, before any human kingdom had drawn its first line across their world. I met my father at the forest's edge on the morning after the signing. He looked older than I remembered, or perhaps I was looking at him differently. The anxiety that had lived in the lines of his face for as long as I could remember had not gone entirely, but it was different. Changed in character from the anxiety of someone afraid of something coming to something more like the discomfort of a person who has looked at themselves clearly and not loved everything they saw. "Seraphine," he said. "Father." He looked at me. I had been in the forest since autumn. It was very nearly spring now. I knew what I looked like. Leaner, tougher at the edges, my hands calloused from months of actual work, my hair less carefully arranged than it had been. I was wearing good wool and sturdy boots, and I was warm and healthy and entirely in my right mind. "You look well," he said, like it surprised him. "I am well." I paused. "I am better than I have ever been." He absorbed this. "Seraphine, I want to—" "I know," I said. "I know you do." I reached out and took his hand, briefly. "And I'm not angry with you, Father. I understand what happened and I understand why, but I need you to understand something in return." He waited. "I am not coming back." I said it gently because it was true, and gentleness doesn't change true things. "This is my home now. This is the life I am choosing. I will write. I will visit. But this—" I looked back at the trees, at the deep, dark, ancient depth of them. "This is where I belong." He followed my gaze. Then he looked back at me. "There's someone," he said, not a question. "Yes." "He's good to you?" I thought of Cale, of amber eyes in firelight, of the careful, patient quality of his attention, the way he had offered and never demanded, the way he had made space for my becoming rather than trying to shape it toward what he needed. "He asked what I wanted," I said. Before anything else." My father was quiet for a moment. "Then," he said finally, "he's better than I was." I hugged him. He held on longer than I expected. When we stepped apart, his eyes were brighter than usual. "Write?" he said. "I'll write." Epilogue. The beginning. Spring came to the Ashvale the way it always had. Not with one decisive morning, but with a slow, irreversible accumulation of small things. A bird singing from a bare branch. The sound of water moving under ice. The first crack of green in the mud where the snowmelt gathered by the southern wall of the cabin. I stood at my door on the morning of the first true thaw and thought, a year ago today I was in my father's house, counting hours. Behind me, in the cabin, I heard the book being set down. At the particular sound of it, the soft thump of the cover, the exhale that meant he had reached a complicated passage and was taking a moment to think. I didn't turn around. I just smiled, facing the forest. Cale came to stand beside me. He was reading well now, easily with the same thorough attention he brought to everything. The natural history book had been supplemented by others, brought by Mira's people from their own stores, and by correspondence with a scholar in the western city who had an extensive collection of pre-kingdom texts and was extremely interested in the possibility of annotating them with the perspectives of people who had been around for the events they described. He was also slowly teaching me the pack language, or as much of it as a human could absorb. The scent components were beyond me entirely, but the body language and the vocal layers were something I was beginning to understand, not fluently, but beginning. "The fern is coming up," I said, pointing to where the first green was pushing through the dark earth. "Earlier than last year," he said. "You've been watching the fern?" "I watch everything." A pause. "You especially." I laughed, which startled a bird out of the nearest pine. "That is either very romantic or very alarming." "Both," he said without apology. He put his arm around my shoulders. "Not a claim. Never that. An offer." I leaned into it, feeling the warmth of him, the steady, particular rightness of it that I had stopped trying to analyze, because analysis was less interesting than simply experiencing the thing. "Mira is coming next week," he said, "with the summer council delegation." "I know." Yeah, she sent word. I paused. She wants to discuss the formal recognition. A stillness in him. Not tension, but attention. And you? And I am ready. I looked out at the forest. The trees were beginning to change, that slow shift from winter gray to the first suggestion of green at the edges of things. I spent 22 years being what other people needed me to be. I spent one winter finding out what I actually was. A pause. What I am is yours, willingly, clearly, on my own terms. He was quiet for a moment. And what are your terms? He asked. That you keep asking, I said, even when you think you know the answer, that you always ask. His arm tightened around my shoulders. Not much, just enough. Always, he said. From somewhere deep in the ash veil, a wolf lifted its voice to the brightening morning sky. Another answered, then another. Layered, building, a sound that carried everything, territory and belonging and the long continuity of something that had been here long before us and would be here long after. I had learned, over the winter, to hear what they were saying. This morning they were saying, here. Here is where we are. Here is what we have. Here is what we protect. Here. And here I was, exactly where I had run to, exactly where I had been, without knowing it, running toward home. And there you have it. Seraphine and Kale, a runaway bride and an alpha king, finding each other in the oldest forest in the world. If this story found something in you, that pull toward the wild, toward choosing for yourself, and toward love that asks before it claims, then you are exactly the kind of person we made Kismet Romance Collection for. If you haven't already, subscribe. New stories arrive every week, and each one is a little different from the last. We have tales of fated mates and second chances, of women who run and women who stay, and women who burn the whole arrangement down and build something better in its place. Leave us a comment below. We read every single one. Tell us your favorite moment from this story. Tell us what you want to hear next. We are listening. And until the next story, stay a little wild.